Hello, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Sweetbats, and today I'm excited to show how I made my first commission using the secondhand Dawn of the Dance Cleo Denial doll. I figured Cleo was a good match for the character due to her face shape and because she's one of the few Monster High dolls with a human skin tone. It was a close enough match, and I didn't want to pull out the airbrush and likely mess something up given that this is a commission. And I chose this one specifically because I do not like her hair at all. I'm not a fan of the tinsel or gel down style. I'll be turning her into Dr. Girlfriend from the Venture Brothers. I absolutely love this show and character, and was so sad when it got cancelled while the 8th season was being written. Coincidentally, I'm working on this video on the 2-year anniversary of the cancellation announcement, but I'm excited for the upcoming movie and hopeful they'll wrap up the series in a satisfying way. While this isn't accurate to the present day as she goes through many changes, the request was for how she was introduced to us in the show. Let's get started. You may see a quality change at some point, as this is another doll I started working on before I moved and got a camcorder for filming. All of my older content was shot on iPhone, and I'm unsure how much of a difference in quality there is. I was just tired of not being able to look at my phone while working, having calls or battery issues mess with my filming, and having process videos take up all the storage space on my phone. You also may be saying to yourself, wow, she sure does have a lot of videos where it changes halfway through to a different desk. And that's because I start things and never finish them in a timely manner, like my last 2 videos that were supposed to be Christmas gifts. This one was also for someone I know personally, who knew about all of the happenings in my life and reasons for delays, so I felt slightly less guilty for the time I took. However, that's not something I want to subject future customers to, so once I get that under control and can have a reasonable completion time, I'll consider opening commissions through my Instagram. Now that I've removed all that horrible hair, wiped her face with acetone, and washed it with warm soapy water, I can start on the hair. I could have left the scalp paint on, but I wasn't really thinking, so I have to paint the black back on. I read something about mixing it with Mod Podge to prevent it from chipping, so I'm giving that a try. I ordered some hair from the Doll Planet in the shade Blackest Night, cut the hair shorter, and start rerouting. People who reroute more than me are probably cringing at this for several reasons. 5 hours and 6 needles later, I have this messy explosion of hair. I glue in the hair with Faber and let it dry before I attempt to tame the hair. Attempt being the key word here, as we now jump forward in time to where I realized I could not get the hair to style how I wanted with either that length or hair type, and ended up cutting it all out and making a wig cap and yarn wefts like usual. I make marks on the wig cap to plan out where the wefts will go, and after protecting the head with plastic wrap, I begin gluing these down. There are several detailed videos on how to make wefts out of yarn from other creators, so I recommend checking out their videos. Mozakito here on YouTube is one, and if you're interested in the pull method to get longer wefts with less waste, search up Dorian the Elf here on YouTube, or check her Instagram at hiki_ksu. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but go check her out, it's great stuff. Whenever I work on the edge, I go over the cap slightly and glue a small section of the hair to the inside of the cap, so it looks neater from the outside. Once all the wefts are glued down, I put plastic wrap on top to help set the part in place, and then begin to trim and curl the hair with large straws, bobby pins, and hairspray. I kinda messed myself up at this part, as putting in the hairspray made it difficult to use heat styling later. Eventually, after looking at proper reference images, I realized this type of curl was not accurate to the character, and I struggled much more than necessary down the line because I set in something I wasn't fully confident in. Lesson learned to not rush my work, and if I'm not sure about something, sleep on it instead of trying to power through. I eventually ended up doing the hair entirely off screen, as I was having trouble getting the style right and even more difficulty keeping it in frame, but I started working in segments, like sweeping the hair to be more behind the ears and setting that in, then wrapping the back and sides of the hair forward around a large straw and setting that, then finally flipping the ends more outward and bringing them to a point with hair wax. Styling hair is probably the part I'm worst at, maybe only second to sewing, but more practice will certainly help me improve. Moving on to the part I have more confidence in, the face-up. After priming with a few layers of Mr. Super Clear, I add some pastel contouring on the face, making Cleo's sharp features even more defined. Continuing with pastel, I add some pink to the lips and clean up any excess with an eraser. Next, I start lining the eye shape, eyelid crease, and iris. For the initial layer, I use colors that are much lighter than what I want them to eventually be, so it's much easier to correct any mistakes. I had a little trouble getting the color to stick on the eye, so I probably didn't do the priming stage correct. MSC is super fickle sometimes, but I do what I can for now, as later layers will build up the color significantly. A good amount of footage from doing her right eye was obscured by my hand, so maybe in future videos I'll figure out a better camera setup so I don't have so much blocked or out of frame progress. The eyebrows are blocked in with pastels and tidied up and reshaped until I'm happy with them. As you can see, they started out a little bit too arched when my hand slipped, so I erased the arch and add pastels below to straighten it out a bit before attempting to mirror the shape on the other side. I darken the ends with a black watercolor pencil and add individual hairs with black, gray, and white pencils to bring in a bit more detail. I actually think these turned out pretty good. Later, I highlight underneath the brows with white pastel. It may look a little bright and overbearing, but the MSC tends to dull lighter colors, so it won't be so harsh. Once I'm happy with the eyebrows, I add some blush, again relying on the incoming MSC coat to keep this from looking too bright. Dr. Girlfriend wears purple eyeshadow, and I think some Pearl X powder would be super fitting here, so I add it to the lid. In fact, sparkles make everything better. Pearl X goes all over the face. At this point, everything's coming together pretty well, so I feel confident enough in the placements to lock in the eyeliner by going over it with black. Since the iris wasn't bright enough for my liking, I try adding some pastel that I can build off of in later layers, and then seal in the first layer. The first thing I do on the second layer is see if the eyes take color any better than before. It does go on a little better, but I've definitely seen other artists have amazing color payoff, so hopefully third time's the charm. I build up the irises into this lovely blue shade. I had to actually check several reference images, as sometimes Dr. Girlfriend's eyes look green, but they're definitely blue in later seasons, where her character model is more detailed. Second layer and beyond are building up colors and adding details, and I'll be focusing more on showing the latter. I always enjoy seeing the small changes in each layer as opposed to just watching the colors get brighter, especially when my hand is covering the process of building up colors so often. I wasn't happy with the lips, and went in with our classic
pink poodle. It's a matte color
to rectify this. It looks really bright and inaccurate on camera, but in person, the color is spot on. The same shade I used for contouring is delicately placed under the eyes to bring a bit more dimension there as well. Unfortunately, the MSC dulled the Pearl X eyeshadow too much, so I use a light purple pastel and pack this on the lid instead. After building up the contour again, I highlight the center of the nose with white pastel to make this look even slimmer. Animated characters tend to have pretty narrow noses, and while I'm ultimately making this in my own style rather than emulating the show's art, I still wanted to replicate this design element. The person who commissioned me loves glitter, so even though I said I wasn't going to show much color buildup on screen, I'm making an exception for the Pearl X. Since it disappears so easily between coats of MSC, I'm really laying it on thick here, hoping it'll survive the sealing process. I struggle with the eyelashes, but ultimately I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. I think in the future I'd like to make them a bit longer and more delicate, but I didn't feel it would look good on this eye shape, and a commission isn't the best place to try out new ideas. The pupil starts out dark blue, and I use this color to add dimension to the edges of the iris. Lastly, I use a super light blue to highlight the iris and finish up the second layer. I started off this layer with the Pearl-Ex powder. Since I always ended up having to go over areas with pencils and pastel to cover up the shimmer, it made sense to have it laid down first instead of doubling back on the facial features. For the fourth layer, I ended up starting with the eyeshadow. It was feeling impossible to keep it from disappearing with each spray of MSC. The eyelid crease got a little buried, so I bring it back at the end of this layer. On the fifth layer, I focus on adding more colors to the eyes, as I think they're looking a little bit flat. The pastel under the eyebrows was getting too muted by the MSC, so I used my chalk pencil instead. It's more bold than I'd normally go for, but since it's a cartoon character, I'm fine with it. I highlight a few more areas since I feel that I'm getting close to the end of this face-up. Layer 6 sees the return of the Pearl-Ex, including back on the eyelids. Hopefully it sticks better this time. So far so good, I think. The final layer is lucky number 7, and after building up the colors as much as I can, I add catch lights to the eyes with white acrylic paint. After I add 2 coats of gloss to the eyes and lips, the face-up is done. Next up is her clothes.
You're famous for your pink suit and pillbox hat.
Me?
Off-screen, I made a dress pattern by using combinations of several of DG Requiem's patterns, modifying until I got something I was somewhat happy with. Her outfit should close in the front, but I couldn't devise a pattern that did this and fit well, and I was worried it would add a bit too much bulk to the front and be distracting, so paint it is. If I were to make this again, I'd probably use the jersey fabric from the Square Bear doll, as the current fabric has no stretch and limits her ability to pose. Oh well, she's going to be displayed and not moved around, so this should be fine. For her signature pillbox hat, I take a somewhat rigid clothing tag and glue it around a thick lip balm tube to get the circular shape and cut it to size, then trace a matching circle for the top of the hat. I cover these with the same pink fabric used for the dress, using a spray adhesive instead of my normal fabric glue to prevent any weird potential discoloration from uneven application. I cut notches into the fabric so I can fold it over somewhat evenly, but it's best to cut triangle shapes instead of lines. The hat ended up a bit too tall, so I had to peel back the fabric, trim the tag to the correct size, and reapply the fabric. I then glue a sewing pin inside the hat so I can affix it to her head. Sewing pins were also used for her earrings. I add some gold paint to them and simply press them into her existing ear holes. I use these Scara Screams boots from my stock box and paint over them with white acrylic paint, and later use an airbrush for more even color application. I had purchased a thin, leathery white fabric with the intent of hand-making the boots, but I was struggling with creating these and figured these already existing boots were close enough. Her hands are too small to make proper gloves, so I paint and later airbrush these as well. Determined to use the fabric on this project in some capacity, I cut out arc shapes, glue down the hem, and glue the sides to each other. I love how these turned out, and I am glad I did this instead of just painting the forearms. And with that, Dr. Girlfriend is ready for her photo shoot. Even though I had a lot of struggles with the creation process, I'm so happy with how she turned out. Ultimately, I had a lot of fun making her, and completing a commission that's been so long in the works is a huge relief. I can't promise that I'll be more active than I have been now that she's done, but I can at least work on other ideas without feeling guilty about an unfinished piece for someone else. It's important to find a good balance so that things get done without burning out and losing love for the hobby. Dr. Girlfriend is off at her new home and adored, and I hope you enjoyed watching her come to life. Thank you to my patrons, Bear and Han, and anyone watching this for your support. It means so much to me that you chose to click on this video and share your time with me, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.
Who the hell is Jacqueline Onassis?